Harvard teacher falls in love with Lakota warrior. Their forbidden romance united two worlds. The train moves slowly across the wide-open land, its metal wheels grinding against the rails, as if unsure about the journey ahead. Daniel Whitaker sat quietly near the window, watching the endless plain stretch toward the horizon. He had left behind the familiar streets of Boston, the tall brick buildings of Harvard, and the comfort of academic life. In their place was a land that felt both beautiful and lonely. The sky seemed larger here, the air sharper, and the silence heavier. Daniel held a leather notebook on his lap. It was filled with plans and ideas about education, community building, and cultural understanding. He believed strongly that knowledge could change lives. That belief had guided him through years of study, long nights in libraries, and endless debates with professors. Now he was about to test that belief in the real world. When the train finally stopped at a small frontier station, Daniel stepped down with a suitcase and a crate of books. A cold wind pushed against him, carrying the scent of dust and dry grass. The town was small, made up of wooden buildings and narrow dirt roads. People moved slowly, watching him with quiet curiosity. He knew he stood out immediately. His neat coat and polished shoes looked out of place among the rough boots and weathered hats of the locals. A man named Mr. Todd Collins, who managed the local schoolhouse, greeted him with a firm handshake. Collins explained that the government had sent Daniel to help expand education programs in the region. There were children from settler families, and sometimes Lakota children who came when they wished. The tone of Collins's voice made it clear that things were complicated. Some people supported education, others were deeply suspicious of it. Daniel listened carefully, trying to understand more than just the words being spoken. He noticed how Collins spoke about the Lakota with a mix of respect and distance, as if unsure how to describe them. Daniel realized quickly that the textbooks he had studied at Harvard did not capture the full reality of this place. The schoolhouse was small, with wooden desks arranged unevenly across the floor. Sunlight entered through narrow windows, lighting up dust floating in the air. Daniel ran his hand along one of the desks, imagining the children who would sit there. He felt excitement, but also pressure. He wanted to succeed not just for himself, but for the belief that education could build bridges between people. During his first days, Daniel tried to introduce lessons he thought would inspire curiosity. He spoke about geography, literature, and science. Some students listened closely, eager to learn. Others seemed distracted or uncomfortable. Daniel began to realize that the way he had been taught to teach might not work here. Outside the classroom, he explored the surrounding land. The plains stretched endlessly, broken only by hills and clusters of trees. He often walked alone in the evenings, trying to clear his thoughts. He wondered if he truly understood the people he had come to help. He wondered if he even had the right to call himself a helper. One afternoon, while traveling with a small supply wagon to collect materials for the school, Daniel experienced his first real encounter with the Lakota community. The wagon driver slowed the horses when he noticed a figure standing ahead on the trail. It was a woman dressed in traditional clothing, her posture strong and calm. Her presence made the air feel still. The driver muttered something under his breath, clearly uneasy. Daniel, however, felt a different emotion, curiosity mixed with respect. The woman stepped forward, her eyes sharp and observant. She introduced herself simply as Wiyaka. Her voice was steady, neither welcoming nor hostile. Daniel introduced himself, explaining that he was a teacher newly arrived from Harvard. He expected questions about education, but instead she asked why he had truly come. The question caught him off guard. He began to speak about learning and progress, but as he talked, he realized his words sounded rehearsed. Wiyaka listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said quietly that many people had come with promises before. Some had claimed they wanted to help but had instead brought change that hurt her people. Her words were not angry, but they carried weight. Daniel felt a sudden awareness of how little he truly knew. He admitted honestly that he did not understand everything. He said he wanted to learn as much as he wanted to teach. The honesty surprised even him. Wiyaka studied his face carefully, as if searching for something beneath his words. Their conversation was brief, but meaningful. She spoke about the land as if it were alive, connected deeply to memory and identity. Daniel realized that the way she described knowledge was different from anything he had learned in a classroom. For her, knowledge came from stories, from experience, and from listening to elders. When they parted ways, Daniel felt unsettled but inspired. The encounter stayed with him long after the wagon continued down the trail. He found himself replaying the conversation, wondering whether his understanding of education needed to change. Back at the settlement, Daniel began observing more than speaking. He watched how families interacted, how children learned from daily life, and how stories were shared around evening fires. He noticed that learning happened everywhere, not only in books. Some settlers grew uneasy with his curiosity about Lakota culture. They warned him not to get too involved. They said it was better to keep distance. Daniel listened politely but felt uncomfortable with the idea of separation. He had come believing education could unite people, not divide them. At night, he wrote long reflections in his notebook. He questioned his own assumptions and admitted that academic theories felt incomplete compared to real human experiences. He began studying the Lakota language from small notes he gathered, even though progress was slow. Days turned into weeks. The school slowly became more active, but Daniel still felt like an outsider. He noticed children watching him carefully, as if testing whether he could be trusted. Instead of forcing strict rules, he started asking them about their own stories and traditions. Some responded with cautious smiles. One evening, while walking near the edge of the settlement, Daniel noticed a figure standing on a hill watching the town. It was Wiyaka. She did not approach, but she did not hide either. Their eyes met across the distance. For a moment, neither moved. Daniel felt a strange sense of connection, as if both of them were standing between two worlds, unsure where they belonged. He raised a hand slightly in greeting. She nodded once before turning away. That silent exchange meant more to him than he expected. It gave him a sense that trust, though fragile, might slowly grow. As the first season came to an end, Daniel made a quiet decision. Instead of trying to change people quickly, he would focus on understanding them. He began rewriting his lesson plans, leaving space for stories from the land and from the children themselves. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. There would be misunderstandings, resistance, and challenges he could not yet imagine, but he also felt something new, a sense that real learning might begin when he stopped believing he had all the answers. Unseen by him, from the distant hills, Wiyaka continued to observe. She watched how he treated the children, how he listened more than he spoke, and how he walked the land with respect. She remained uncertain, but curiosity had replaced some of her doubt. The story of their lives had only just begun, and neither of them yet understood how deeply their meeting would shape the future of both their worlds. The cold winds of early autumn moved across the plains, carrying dry leaves and the distant sound of birds heading south. Daniel Whitaker stood outside the small schoolhouse, watching children run across the yard before the morning lessons began. Over the past weeks, small changes had started to shape his routine. He no longer relied only on textbooks. Instead, he listened more closely to the children and allowed their stories and experiences to guide the lessons. At first, it had felt strange to change methods he had studied for years, but slowly he noticed something different. The students seemed more interested. They asked more questions. Some who had once sat silently now spoke with confidence. Daniel realized that learning became stronger when people felt seen and respected. One morning, a Lakota boy arrived at the school carrying a small carved object made from wood. The boy hesitated before showing it to Daniel. It was carefully shaped with patterns that told a story Daniel did not fully understand. Instead of treating it as a distraction, Daniel asked the boy to explain its meaning to the class. The room became quiet as the child spoke about tradition, family, and memory. Daniel watched the other students listening with curiosity and respect. Moments like this began to change the atmosphere inside the school. Lessons became conversations rather than lectures. Daniel still taught reading and writing, but he also encouraged storytelling and shared experiences. Some settler parents approved of the new energy in the classroom, while others worried he was moving away from traditional expectations.
Outside the school, however, tension grew slowly.
Rumors spread that Daniel was becoming too sympathetic toward Lakota traditions. A few settlers questioned whether he still represented their interests. Daniel sensed the shift but chose to focus on his work. One afternoon, while walking along a narrow path near the edge of the settlement, Daniel heard the sound of hurried footsteps. He turned and saw Wiaka approaching. Her expression was serious but calm. She informed him that a young Lakota child had been injured near a rocky area and needed help. Without hesitation, Daniel followed her across the open land. The walk felt longer than usual, filled with silence that was not uncomfortable but heavy with purpose. When they reached the child, Daniel immediately assessed the situation. The injury was not severe, but it required careful attention. Using the supplies he carried, he cleaned and wrapped the wound while speaking gently to reassure the child. Wiaka watched closely, her eyes studying every movement. When Daniel finished, she nodded slightly, as if acknowledging his effort. They walked back together slowly, the setting sun painting the sky with warm colors. During the walk, their conversation deepened. Wiaka asked about his life before arriving here. Daniel described Harvard, the crowded lecture halls, the endless books, and the feeling of being surrounded by ideas. He admitted that despite all his learning, he often felt disconnected from real-life experiences. Wiaka listened carefully, occasionally asking questions that revealed her sharp understanding of people. In return, she spoke about her role within her community. She described the responsibility of protecting traditions and guiding younger members. She spoke of the land as a teacher itself, offering lessons through seasons and change. Daniel found her perspective both humbling and inspiring. Their meetings became more frequent after that day. Sometimes they spoke near the school, sometimes during walks across the plains. The conversations moved from cautious exchanges to genuine discussions filled with curiosity and mutual respect. Daniel began learning more Lakota words, practicing quietly in the evenings. He made mistakes often, but Wiaka corrected him patiently. Each small success felt like a step closer to understanding a world he had once only read about. Meanwhile, the town began to notice their growing connection. Some settlers whispered about it with disapproval. Others were simply curious. Daniel felt the weight of their attention but tried not to let it affect his choices. One evening during a town gathering, a heated discussion broke out about the future of education in the area. Some community members argued that Lakota tradition should not influence the school curriculum. Others believed cooperation could strengthen relationships. Daniel listened for a long time before finally speaking. He explained that education should not erase identity, but help people understand each other. He shared examples from his classroom, describing how students had grown more engaged when their cultures were respected. His words were calm but firm. The room fell silent for a moment. Some people nodded, while others frowned. Daniel knew his position might isolate him, but he felt it was necessary to speak honestly. After the meeting, he walked outside into the cool night air. The sky was filled with stars, brighter than anything he had seen in the city. He felt both relief and uncertainty. Standing up for his beliefs had strengthened his resolve, but also deepened the divide between him and certain settlers. Wiaka found him standing alone near the edge of the gathering. She had watched from a distance, listening to a speech. Without saying much, she told him that actions mattered more than words. Her tone held a quiet respect that meant more to him than praise. Days turned into weeks, and the changing season brought new challenges. Daniel noticed that some students stopped attending regularly because their families feared outside influence. He felt discouraged, but continued adapting his approach, hoping trust would return over time. One afternoon, while organizing books inside the school, he discovered a small drawing left on his desk. It showed two figures standing on opposite sides of a river with a bridge between them. There was no name on it, but he recognized the message immediately. The image stayed in his mind, symbolizing the fragile connection he was trying to build. As autumn deepened, Daniel began spending more time outdoors with his students, teaching lessons inspired by the natural environment. They studied plants, animals, and the patterns of the sky. The children laughed more, and even the quietest among them began participating. Wiaka occasionally joined these outdoor sessions, observing silently. Sometimes she added her own insights, sharing stories that connected the land to memory and identity. Daniel noticed how naturally she spoke, how the children listened with respect. Their growing friendship created a balance neither had expected. Daniel brought structured knowledge, while Wayaka offered lived wisdom. Together, they created moments of learning that felt genuine rather than forced. Yet beneath this progress, tension continued building. Some settlers accused Daniel of choosing sides. Certain Lakota members remained cautious, unsure whether his efforts would last. Daniel felt caught between two worlds, unsure whether he truly belonged to either. Despite the challenges, he refused to retreat. Each day he reminded himself why he had come, not to impose change, but to understand and connect. One evening after a long day, Daniel and Wayaka walked along a ridge overlooking the plains. The wind moved gently through the tall grass, creating a sound like distant whispers. They spoke about trust, about fear, and about the difficulty of bridging cultures. Wayaka told him that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned, slowly, through consistent actions. Daniel nodded, understanding that his journey was only beginning. As the sun set, painting the horizon in shades of gold and red, Daniel felt a sense of clarity. He realized that true learning was not about proving knowledge, but about building relationships. The path ahead remained uncertain, but he felt stronger knowing he was not walking it alone. Far below them, the small settlement glowed with evening light, while beyond it the vast land stretched endlessly. Between those two worlds stood Daniel and Wayaka, slowly discovering that understanding could grow even in places filled with doubt. The winter came slowly at first, then all at once. Cold air moved across the plains, covering the land with frost each morning. Daniel Whitaker woke early one day and stepped outside the schoolhouse, pulling his coat tighter around him. The world looked different under winter light. Quieter, calmer, and filled with a deep stillness that made every sound feel important. Over the past months, his life had changed in ways he never expected. Teaching no longer felt like a duty assigned by distant officials. Instead, it had become a shared journey between him and the people around him. The students greeted him with warmth now, and even some families who once stayed distant began offering small gestures of trust. Yet the greatest change came through his growing connection with Wayaka. Their conversations had moved beyond careful politeness. Now they spoke openly, sharing thoughts that felt personal and meaningful. Sometimes they walked together across the frozen plains, their footsteps leaving quiet paths behind them. Other times they sat near a fire, speaking about their memories and dreams. Daniel found himself listening more than speaking. Wayaka's stories carried lessons shaped by generations. She spoke of ancestors, of resilience, and of the importance of balance between change and tradition. Each word made Daniel reflect on his own upbringing, where progress was often measured by how quickly things changed, rather than how deeply they were understood. One afternoon, as snow began to fall lightly, Wayaka brought Daniel to a small gathering of her community. He felt nervous, aware that not everyone welcomed his presence. Some watched him with curiosity, others with caution. He greeted people respectfully, careful not to assume familiarity. During the gathering, stories were shared through song and spoken word. Daniel listened closely, even though he did not understand every word. He realized that knowledge existed here in forms that could not be found in books. The rhythm of voices, the connection between people, and the shared history created a powerful sense of unity. Afterward, Wayaka asked him what he thought. Daniel admitted that he felt honored but also humbled. He recognized how much he still had to learn. She nodded, pleased by his honesty. As winter deepened, their bond grew stronger. The trust between them moved quietly into something more personal. Daniel noticed how he looked forward to her presence, how conversations felt incomplete when she was not there. Wayaka, too, seemed more relaxed around him, allowing moments of laughter and warmth that had been rare before. Despite this closeness, both understood the challenges surrounding them. The world they lived in did not easily accept relationships between different cultures. Rumors began spreading among settlers, some expressing concern, others disapproval. Daniel heard whispers during town visits, but he chose not to confront them directly. Within the Lakota community, reactions were mixed as well. Some respected Wiaka's judgment, while others worried about the risks of trusting an outsider so deeply. These pressures created quiet tension that neither of them could ignore. One evening, while walking along a frozen river, Daniel spoke about his fears. He worried that his presence might bring unwanted attention to Wiaka. He admitted that he sometimes felt torn between his past and his present, unsure where he truly belonged. Wiaka listened carefully before responding. She told him that belonging was not about choosing one world over another, but about standing honestly between them. Her words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, change approached in another form. Government officials arrived in the settlement bringing news of new policies affecting land use and community structures. Their presence created unease among the Lakota and excitement among some settlers who believed the changes would bring growth. Daniel attended several meetings where officials spoke confidently about progress and development. As he listened, he felt growing discomfort. The language used sounded familiar, similar to academic discussions he had once participated in. But now he understood how those decisions could affect real people and traditions. Wiaka shared concerns from her community. Many feared that the new policies would limit their way of life and weaken their connection to the land. Daniel found himself caught between two perspectives, struggling to reconcile the ideals he had been taught with the reality he now witnessed. One afternoon, during a discussion between settlers and Lakota representatives, tensions rose quickly. Voices became louder and misunderstandings grew. Daniel watched as both sides spoke past each other rather than listening. He realized that silence would only deepen the divide. Gathering courage, he stepped forward and spoke calmly. He explained that real progress required understanding and respect. He encouraged both groups to listen rather than argue. His words did not solve everything, but they shifted the tone of the conversation enough to prevent further conflict. Afterward, some settlers accused him of taking sides. They questioned his loyalty and reminded him of the institution that had sent him there. Daniel felt the weight of their judgment, yet he also felt clarity. For the first time, he recognized that neutrality sometimes meant allowing harm to continue.
That realization marked a turning point in his journey.
As weeks passed, Daniel's connection with Wiaka deepened further. They began sharing small moments that felt meaningful, preparing meals together, teaching each other new skills, and watching the changing sky at sunset. Their relationship was not dramatic or rushed. It grew slowly, built on trust and mutual respect. Daniel found himself learning patience from her. She taught him to observe before reacting, to listen to the land, and to understand that strength often came from quiet resilience rather than loud action. Yet challenges continued to appear. Some settlers began distancing themselves from him, avoiding conversations or treating him with cold politeness. Invitations to social gatherings became less frequent. Daniel felt moments of loneliness, but refused to abandon his principles. One particularly cold evening, after a long day of discussions about the new policies, Daniel and Wiaka stood together on a hill overlooking the plains. The snow reflected moonlight, creating a soft glow across the land. Daniel admitted that he feared losing everything he had once worked toward: his career, his reputation, and the approval of those who had supported him. Wiaka reminded him that true strength often required sacrifice. She spoke gently but firmly, encouraging him to trust the path he had chosen. In that moment, Daniel realized that his journey was no longer about proving himself to others. It was about living honestly, according to what he believed was right. As winter slowly moved toward its end, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. During a public meeting about the new policies, he openly opposed proposals that would harm the Lakota community. His words were respectful but clear, leaving no doubt about his position. The room fell silent as he finished speaking. Some faces showed shock, others anger, and a few quiet respect. Daniel knew immediately that he had crossed a line that could not be undone. After the meeting, he walked outside into the cold night air, unsure what the future would hold. Wiaka approached him without hesitation. She did not speak at first, but her presence alone gave him strength. Together they stood beneath the wide sky, knowing that the choices they made would shape not only their own lives, but also the fragile connection between two worlds struggling to understand each other. Winter slowly gave way to early spring, but the change in season did not bring immediate calm. After Daniel spoke openly against the new policies during the public meeting, the atmosphere in the settlement shifted. Some people stopped greeting him as warmly as before. Conversations ended when he approached. He felt the distance growing around him, like an invisible wall separating him from the community he had once tried so hard to impress. Despite the tension, Daniel continued teaching at the school each morning. The children remained a steady source of hope. Their laughter filled the small wooden room, and their curiosity reminded him why he had come here in the first place. He focused on creating lessons that encouraged cooperation and understanding, believing that change often began quietly, one person at a time. Uyaka noticed the weight he carried even when he tried to hide it. She encouraged him to walk with her across the plains whenever he felt overwhelmed. Those walks became moments of reflection. They spoke about courage, about the price of standing for something meaningful, and about how true change often faced resistance before acceptance. Word spread quickly about Daniel's stance. Some settlers accused him of betraying his own people. Others simply avoided discussing the matter, unsure where they stood. A few, however, began approaching him privately, admitting that they respected his honesty, even if they did not fully agree. Meanwhile, tensions between the settlers and the Lakota community grew stronger. The government officials continued pushing their plans, holding meetings that felt more like announcements than conversations. Many Lakota families felt unheard, worried about losing control over their land and traditions. Daniel found himself in a difficult position. He was trusted by some members of both communities, but fully accepted by neither. Yet this middle ground gave him a unique role. He began acting as an informal mediator, helping translate not just language but intention. He explained Lakota concerns to settlers who had never listened closely before. At the same time, he reassured Lakota leaders that some settlers were willing to find peaceful solutions. One afternoon, a misunderstanding nearly led to a serious conflict. A group of settlers believed that Lakota warriors had crossed into restricted territory, while the Lakota insisted they were simply following traditional routes. Voices rose, and the tension felt heavy in the air. Daniel stepped forward carefully, asking both sides to pause. He spoke calmly, encouraging everyone to explain their perspective without interruption. His steady tone helped slow the situation, allowing people to listen rather than react immediately. With time, it became clear that the conflict had grown from confusion rather than intention. The moment passed without further escalation, leaving many surprised at how close they had come to confrontation.
Afterward, Daniel felt both relief and exhaustion.
He realized how fragile peace could be, and how easily fear could turn into anger. Uyaka later told him that his presence had prevented more than he might ever fully understand. Her words gave him strength, but he knew the challenges were far from over. Their relationship became more visible as they spent more time together openly. Some people began viewing them as a symbol of cooperation between cultures, while others continued to see their bond as something uncomfortable or unusual.
Daniel and Uyaka rarely spoke directly about the opinions of others, choosing instead to focus on the trust they were building between themselves.
One evening, they attended a gathering near the Lakota camp where stories and songs were shared under the open sky. Daniel felt honored to be invited, though he remained respectful of the space. Watching the community come together reminded him that identity was not something easily separated from tradition and history. He understood more deeply that love and respect for culture could exist alongside change rather than in opposition to it. At the same time, Daniel received a letter from his former colleagues at Harvard. The tone was formal but distant, suggesting that his recent actions had raised concerns. They encouraged him to reconsider his involvement in local disputes and return to a more neutral role. Reading the letter left him unsettled. The institution that had shaped his identity now seemed unsure of him. He spent hours reflecting on what neutrality truly meant. In the past, he had believed that staying balanced between opposing sides was the best way to maintain peace. Now he understood that silence could sometimes allow injustice to continue. The realization was both freeing and frightening. Wayaka noticed his quiet mood that evening and asked what troubled him. Daniel shared the letter and his fears about losing his connection to the academic world. She listened patiently before reminding him that identity was not defined by one place or role. She encouraged him to think about the person he wanted to become, rather than the expectations others placed upon him. As spring flowers began appearing across the plains, Daniel felt a gradual shift in himself. He no longer saw his journey as a temporary assignment. Instead, he began imagining a future where learning could exist without forcing anyone to abandon their traditions. Together with Wayaka, he started discussing ideas for a new kind of learning space, one where Lakota stories and Western education could exist side by side. The idea felt ambitious, but it gave them both a sense of purpose. However, another challenge soon emerged. A group of settlers organized a meeting expressing concern about the growing cooperation between Daniel and the Lakota community. They feared that their own traditions might be ignored or replaced. Daniel attended the meeting, prepared to listen rather than argue. He explained that respect did not mean losing identity. He described how understanding different cultures could strengthen communities rather than weaken them. Some people remained skeptical, but others began to see the possibility of coexistence rather than competition. The conversation ended without complete agreement, but it opened a door that had once been closed. Later that night, Daniel and Wayaka stood on a hill overlooking the settlement. Lights from small homes flickered below, and the sound of distant voices carried through the cool air. They spoke about how far they had come since their first meeting on the trail. Daniel admitted that he had once believed change came from knowledge alone. Now he understood that it also required patience, humility, and courage. Wayaka shared her own thoughts about trust. She said that trust grew slowly, like roots beneath the ground, unseen but strong. She believed their journey together had shown others that cooperation was possible, even if it took time. As they stood together beneath the wide sky, Daniel felt a sense of calm despite the uncertainty ahead. He knew that challenges would continue, but he also felt confident that the path they were creating mattered.
In the days that followed, small signs of progress appeared. Some settlers began visiting the school again, curious about the new lessons Daniel introduced.
A few Lakota families expressed interest in participating more openly. The fragile balance between worlds began to feel less impossible. The season of renewal mirrored the changes happening within the community and within Daniel himself. He no longer felt like a visitor trying to prove his worth. Instead, he felt like a bridge, imperfect but necessary, connecting people who had once stood far apart. And though the future remained uncertain, one truth became clear to him. Unity did not require losing differences. It required understanding them, honoring them, and finding the courage to walk forward together. Spring slowly turned into early summer, bringing warmth back to the plains. The tall grass moved gently with the wind, and the land felt alive again after the long, cold months. Daniel Whitaker stood outside the schoolhouse one morning watching children arrive in small groups. Some came from settler families, others from the Lakota community. The sight filled him with quiet pride because not long ago, such a gathering would have seemed impossible. Life had changed in ways Daniel never expected when he first stepped off the train months earlier. He had arrived with ideas shaped by books and lectures, believing he understood what education should look like. Now he saw learning differently. It was not about one culture teaching another how to live. It was about sharing knowledge and growing together. The challenges from the past months had left marks on everyone. Trust between communities remained fragile, and misunderstandings still happened, but small steps forward were visible. Families that once avoided each other now exchanged polite greetings. Children played together more freely. These changes felt slow, but they were real. Daniel and Wayaka spent many evenings discussing the future. They often sat near a small fire, watching the stars appear one by one in the wide sky. Their bond had deepened into a quiet partnership built on respect, honesty, and shared purpose. They understood that their relationship represented more than personal feelings. For many people, they had become a symbol of connection between two worlds. One evening, Daniel shared an idea that had been growing in his mind. He wanted to create a new learning space, not just a school, but a place where different traditions could exist side by side. a place where Lakota stories and Western subjects could be taught together without one replacing the other. Wiyaka listened carefully, considering his words. She reminded him that such a place would require trust from both communities. It would not be easy, and many people might resist at first. But she also believed the idea held promise. Together they began speaking with elders, parents, and community leaders, asking for opinions rather than demanding support. Some people reacted with enthusiasm, while others remained cautious. The idea challenged old ways of thinking. Yet as discussions continued, more voices joined the conversation. Daniel made sure to listen more than he spoke, understanding that the project could only succeed if everyone felt included. At the same time, Daniel faced personal decisions. Letters from Harvard continued arriving, offering him a chance to return to academic life. The opportunities were familiar and safe, promising recognition and stability. For several nights he lay awake, thinking about what path he should choose. He realized that his journey had changed him deeply. The person who had arrived here months ago was not the same man standing on the plains now. He had learned that real education came from relationships, from shared experiences, and from the courage to step outside comfort. One morning he wrote a reply declining the invitation to return immediately. He thanked his former colleagues but explained that his work here felt unfinished. Writing those words brought both relief and uncertainty. He knew he had chosen a path without clear guarantees, but it felt honest. Meanwhile, the community began preparing a gathering to discuss the new learning space. People from both sides attended, sitting together in a large open area near the school. Daniel felt nervous as he looked around, aware that the outcome could shape the future of everything he had worked toward. Instead of giving a long speech, he spoke simply. He described his experiences since arriving and shared how much he had learned from both communities. He emphasized that the goal was not to change anyone's identity but to create understanding. When he finished, he invited others to speak. An elder from the Lakota community stood first, sharing memories of times when traditions were misunderstood or ignored. He expressed hope that future generations might grow up with greater respect for one another. A settler parent followed, admitting that fear of change had once made cooperation difficult, but that seeing children learn together had shifted his perspective. The discussion lasted for hours, filled with thoughtful words and careful listening. By the end, there was no perfect agreement, but there was enough shared hope to move forward. Plans began forming for a small building where both cultures could contribute to teaching. Daniel and Wiyaka worked side by side as the project slowly came to life. Some days were filled with excitement as volunteers gathered to help. Other days brought frustration when disagreements arose about how lessons should be structured. Through it all, they remained patient, reminding themselves that meaningful change required time. Their relationship continued growing naturally during this process. They shared quiet laughter during long work days and supported each other through moments of doubt. People began seeing them not only as individuals, but as partners who represented cooperation. One afternoon, as they watched children painting symbols from both cultures on the walls of the new building, Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He remembered the first time he had met Wiyaka on the trail, the tension, the uncertainty, and the distance between them. Now they stood together, surrounded by people working toward a shared future. Despite the progress, challenges still appeared. Some individuals remained skeptical, worried that traditions might fade over time. Daniel and Wiyaka addressed these concerns openly, encouraging ongoing dialogue. They understood that unity did not mean complete agreement. It meant continuing to listen even when differences remained. As summer reached its peak, the learning space officially opened. It was modest in size but filled with meaning. Inside, children learned reading and mathematics alongside traditional stories, crafts, and lessons about the land. The atmosphere felt different from any place Daniel had known before, balanced, respectful, and alive with curiosity. During the opening gathering, Daniel watched families from both communities standing together. He felt a quiet emotion rising inside him, a mix of gratitude and humility. He knew that the success of the project belonged to everyone who had believed in it. Later that evening, he and Wiyaka walked to the same hill where they had often talked during difficult times. The sky glowed with warm colors as the sun set over the plains. They spoke about the journey behind them and the unknown future ahead. Daniel admitted that he no longer felt like a teacher trying to shape others. Instead, he felt like a lifelong student, constantly learning from the world around him. Wiyaka smiled gently, saying that true strength came from understanding that learning never ended. Standing together beneath the wide sky, they felt a quiet sense of peace. Their love had not erased the differences between their worlds. Instead, it had created a bridge strong enough to hold both. The story of their lives did not end with perfect harmony or complete resolution. Challenges would continue and history could not be changed overnight, but they had shown that understanding was possible when built on respect, patience, and courage. As the stars appeared one by one, Daniel realized that the greatest lesson he had learned was simple. Unity did not require losing identity. It required honoring it while finding the courage to walk forward together, step by step, toward a future shaped by shared hope.